Hello and welcome to Life Sciences Knowledge Hub. I'm David and this is your one-stop shop for industry insight and analysis. Joining me now is Zahid Moneer from BNP Paribas. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Zahid. Tell me a bit about your role at BNP Paribas and its work in the life sciences sector.
Thank you again for inviting me, and good afternoon to everybody. My role essentially at BNP is to head up healthcare advisory. So one of the key things that we do and we work on is around mergers and acquisitions, IPOs of life science companies. And we also have a fund where we provide some pre-IPO funding for life science companies. So all in all, my role encompasses those various attributes.
Super. Any examples, any case studies that you're able to share of key projects, key investments, and what the factors in their success have been?
Sure. So if we look at the main focus of my role at BNP, which is mergers and acquisitions, what we're doing is advising clients, especially life science clients, specialty pharma clients, on what they should be doing in terms of should it be merging with someone or should the shareholders be crystallizing value. So there's been various deals going on. I recently sold a private UK company to a US listed company at 10 times revenues. And the key features there was it had a proprietary platform. So very importantly, it was a hydrogel platform that's used within the women's health context. It had much better efficacy than what the current gold standard was, and its real commercial potential was appreciated by the buyer, and hence they were willing to pay quite a significant premium for the company. So likewise, that's a critical feature of life sciences companies, is really to be able to propagate and make buyers, investors understand what your underlying technology is, its commercial applicability, and the risk profile associated with it. So, where there is risk or where it's been de-risked, making sure investors understand those aspects.
Really interesting. Thank you very much. And yes, 10 times revenues there. That does sound like a really healthy deal all around. Tell me, are there any areas that in biotech that you're particularly excited by at the moment that you see as the most attractive to invest in, and why so?
And there's some key areas that are really exciting. So the obvious one that will be on people's radar is going to be the mRNA platform that we're seeing the huge impact that it's had in the COVID-19 vaccine. So BioNTech, CureVac, Moderna, for example, having great advances there. The really exciting element of this is that mRNA, the platform, wasn't actually originally designed as a infectious disease, or it may have been, but it was a minor part. It was really propagated as being a treatment, a therapeutic treatment for cancer and other big therapeutic, other major therapeutic areas. Now, with the vaccines being now commercialized, it's made the whole platform de-risked. So in terms of adverse events and so forth. And so it's a lot more applicable now to the other areas as well. So we may be seeing mRNA playing a much more major role in cancer treatment as a therapeutic vaccine and in other big therapeutic areas. So that's one aspect that we've seen, one of the big positives, I guess, what we've seen come out of this whole COVID period. Separate to that, what we're seeing is large cap pharma in general is focused around R&D and within stem cell therapy and genomic-based R&D. So gene editing and not just on the gene editing side, now going more upstream around RNA manipulation. So these areas around cell therapy, gene editing, DNA manipulation, etc., are now becoming critically important, especially as people now identify, because of the huge amount of work done through genomic analysis, it's now easier to identify the exact DNA sequence that's causing a particular pathology, and then editing that, silencing that, manipulating that particular gene, either at the DNA level or at the RNA level, has become a lot more doable than it has been over the last sort of 5 years. So these are really exciting times.
Interesting point you make about mRNA there, and we've seen how COVID has acted as a catalyst for many industries. It almost sounds difficult to talk about it in that way, but it certainly has. And particularly with the vaccine development, and you mentioned the BioNTech, for example, it's curious how it's taken something like the pandemic to actually enable this field to almost create a new life, and as you say, it's certainly an area that you're interested in. Is there anything else you can identify that almost comes off the back of the pandemic? Any areas where we have looked at technologies in a different way, and now coming out the other end of it, we might be able to get some benefit from them beyond what was in their original scope, perhaps?
Yeah. And one aspect, of course, is the way clinical trials are run now, because the COVID vaccines were accelerated through by the FDA and in EMA in trials in a truncated manner. The question now arises, why shouldn't a similar system, why can we not accelerate other products within, say, cancer therapy or critical drugs, etc., also be generated? Can we make the whole process of R&D a lot more efficient as a result of that? So that's something that should be considered. On the other aspect of where the benefits in the industry have arisen, if one looks at the diagnostic side, molecular diagnostics and focusing around PCR testing around COVID-19, we're seeing those type of companies really boosted in terms of their valuations because of COVID-19, but also being taken a lot more seriously by the commercial market. So hopefully we'll see molecular diagnostics being used a lot more effectively, not just in COVID-19 infectious diseases, but perhaps in other critical areas as well. So all in all, if we look at the impact of COVID on the industry, we've seen not just COVID-related companies developing the vaccines going under huge valuation upswings, but also on the testing side, on the diagnostics, on the service providers. We've seen an impact really across the board. But hopefully a lot of those efficiencies and optimizations can remain as COVID stabilizes moving forward.
Zahid, before we have to wrap up on time, I'm afraid, I just want to ask you about advice. Thinking about our audience today, if there's anyone watching who might be looking at some point to secure funding from investors such as yourself, what advice would you give to them?
Great question. So the critical elements that an investor would look at is going to be, one, your equity story. How is your technology different to the current gold standard? So if you've got a life sciences product that's about to be launched, what is the commercial advantages there? Are you more efficacious? Is there a better side effect profile? So that needs to be very clearly extrapolated. Then what are the risks in your process? So if it's in clinical development, has your molecule, has your mechanism of action been used in another therapeutic area and has already been launched? And so is your product de-risked by that way? So those aspects would need to be considered. You should then consider, from an investor's perspective, clearly as you move down towards commerciability, your risk profile decreases, you become a lot more attractive, and your valuation, of course, increases substantially as well. So approaching investors at the right time point is going to be critically important. And so the more of these risk factors you can get under the bed or covered, the increase you will have in your valuation. So that's going to be critical to really show that your equity story is very clear. You've got good efficacy, you've got a great side effect profile. Whatever your advantages are in the current market, what is the market? How is that defined? Is that growing, etc.? What are the current treatments out there? Is there an unaddressed market? So that needs to be encapsulated as part of your equity story. And then finally, really addressing the key point for any investor is going to be the risk around the investment. If you can show that most of those elements have been de-risked, your valuation conversely will go up quite substantially.
The right story at the right time. Listen, Zahid, terrific story over the last 10 minutes chatting with you. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you very much indeed for joining us and sharing your story. I wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much. Privilege.